Look at yourself, Lydia. You're nearly 50. You're expiring. And frankly, you can't afford me anymore." Those were the last words Gavin said to his wife of 20 years before tossing a prenup on the mahogany table of a crowded restaurant. He thought he had won. He thought he was trading in a used model for a brand new life with a 24-year-old Instagram model. He thought Lydia would crawl away, wither, and disappear into the suburbs, counting pennies. But Gavin made one fatal calculation error. He forgot who actually built his empire in the first place. He didn't know that while he was busy mocking her for being old and broke, Lydia was quietly signing a check that would erase his name from the building he stood in. This is the story of how the discarded wife didn't just get even. She became the boss. The waiter at Le Cuckoo in Manhattan hesitated before pouring the water. He could feel the tension radiating off table 12 like heat from a pavement in July. Gavin Sterling, CEO of Sterling Logistics, adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit. He didn't look at his wife. He was looking at his reflection in the window, admiring how the grey at his temples made him look distinguished rather than aged. At 52, Gavin felt he was entering his prime. Across from him sat Lydia. She was wearing a navy blazer that was at least 4 years old, her hair pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense bun. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a lack of sleep, but the deep, marrow-level exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying a dead weight for 2 decades. "Are we going to order?" Lydia asked, her voice steady, though her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her napkin. "Or are you going to keep checking your watch every 30 seconds? Gavin finally turned to her. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth that had been there when they were 25 and eating instant noodles in a basement apartment in Queens. "I have a flight to catch, Lydia. Aspen. So let's make this quick." He reached into his briefcase and slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. It hit the silverware with a heavy clunk. "What is this?" "It's an amendment to the separation agreement," Gavin said, taking a sip of his sparkling water. "My lawyers found a loophole in the initial asset division. The warehouse in Jersey, the one your father put the down payment on. It's technically company property, and since I'm the sole director of Sterling Logistics—" Lydia froze. "That warehouse was my inheritance, Gavin. My father bought that so we could start the business. It's the only thing I have left to generate income." Gavin smirked. It was a cruel, practiced expression. "Business is business, Lyd. You know that. Besides, what would you do with a logistics hub? You've been a housewife for 15 years. You don't know how the world works anymore." "I ran the books for 10 of those years," Lydia countered, her voice rising. "I negotiated the contracts with the unions while you were out playing golf with investors." "Ancient history," Gavin waved a hand dismissively. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper that cut deeper than a scream. "Here's the reality check you need, sweetheart. You are 48 years old. You have no degree relevant to this century, no network, and now no capital. You're old, you're broke, and honestly, you're boring." Lydia felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was the accuracy of his perception. In the eyes of his world, the high-flying, private jet corporate world, she was invisible. "I'm leaving you, Lydia," Gavin continued, checking his watch again. "Not just for the business, but for Sienna." "Sienna?" Lydia asked. "Your assistant? She's younger than our daughter." "She's 24. She's vibrant. She has life in her. She doesn't smell like—" He wrinkled his nose, gesturing vaguely at Lydia. "Resignation. She looks good on my arm at galas. You look like my chaperone." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He threw a $100 bill on the table, not enough to cover the untouched meal, but enough to be insulting. "Sign the papers, Lydia. Take the small alimony settlement and move to, I don't know, Florida? Get a cat. Knit something. Just don't embarrass me by trying to cling to a life you can no longer afford." He walked out. He didn't look back. Lydia sat there, the envelope heavy under her hand. The waiter returned, looking sympathetic. "Mademoiselle, should I bring the wine list?" Lydia looked at the door where her husband of 20 years had just exited, taking her dignity with him. She looked at the envelope. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She took a deep breath. "No," Lydia said, her voice changing. The tremble in her hand stopped. "Bring me a double espresso and a pen." She wasn't going to sign the surrender. She was going to draft a war plan. The humiliation didn't end at the restaurant. Gavin made sure of that. Over the next 3 months, the divorce proceedings became a spectator sport for New York's elite. Gavin's lawyer, a shark named Richard Thorne, painted Lydia as a leech. They leaked stories to the press. CEO's ex-wife demands millions for emotional distress while company stocks soar. They froze her credit cards. They locked her out of the Hamptons house. Gavin moved Sienna into their penthouse overlooking Central Park before the ink was even dry on the separation papers. Lydia found herself living in a one-bedroom rental in Astoria, Queens, just a few blocks from where she and Gavin had started 20 years ago. It was poetic, in a sick, twisted way. She was back at square one. But Gavin had made a mistake. He assumed Lydia was broke because she didn't have cash in his bank accounts. He forgot that Lydia came from a family of silent, Depression-era savers. He forgot about the old and boring things Lydia used to do while he was out partying. Lydia sat on the floor of her small apartment, surrounded by boxes. She wasn't knitting. She was on a laptop, conducting a forensic audit of Sterling Logistics. She knew the company better than Gavin did. She knew where the bodies were buried. Specifically, she knew about the Cobalt Initiative. 6 years ago, Gavin had wanted to expand into rare earth mining transport in Africa. Lydia had advised against it. Too volatile, too unethical. Gavin had ignored her, but he had hidden the losses in shell companies to keep the stock price high. "You think you're untouchable, Gavin," she whispered to the screen. Her phone buzzed. It was Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur was 70 years old, a retired corporate attorney who had been her father's best friend. He was the only person in the city who would still take her call. "Lydia," Arthur's gravelly voice crackled. "I looked over the documents you sent. The shell companies." "And?" Lydia held her breath. "It's actionable," Arthur said, "but it's dangerous. If we expose this, the stock tanks. You lose your alimony settlement. You lose everything. You'll be destroying the company to spite him." "I don't want to destroy the company, Arthur," Lydia said, standing up and walking to the window. She looked out at the gritty street below. "I built that company. I drove the first truck. I did the dispatching from our kitchen table. It's my company. Then what's the plan?" "Gavin is over-leveraged," Lydia explained, her mind racing. "He's spending money he doesn't have on this new image. The jets, the diamonds for Sienna, the rebranding. He's issuing bonds to cover the operating costs." "He's cash poor," Arthur realized. "Exactly. He's asset-rich, cash poor, and ego-bloated. He needs a liquidity injection fast, or he defaults on the loans for the new fleet." "So?" "So." Lydia smiled for the first time in months. "We're going to give him the money, but he's not going to know it's coming from me." "Lydia, you have $200,000 from your mother's trust. That's not enough to buy a seat on the board, let alone the company." "No," Lydia agreed, "but it is enough to start an investment firm, and I know exactly who to recruit. Do you remember Tobias Frey?" Arthur gasped. "The tech genius Gavin fired in 2019? The one who swore revenge? The very same. He's been working in a garage in Seattle. I think it's time I paid him a visit." Lydia hung up. She walked to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at her reflection. No makeup, grey roots showing, wearing a tracksuit. "Old and broke," she repeated Gavin's words. She reached into her bag and pulled out a box of hair dye, a rich, fiery auburn. "Not for long, Gavin," she said. Not for long. Seattle was raining, which suited Lydia's mood perfectly. She found Tobias Frey not in a garage, but in the back of a high-end coffee shop, furiously typing code on a laptop covered in stickers. Tobias was 30, disheveled and brilliant. He had designed the proprietary tracking software that made Sterling Logistics the fastest in the industry. Gavin had fired him because Tobias refused to cut corners on safety protocols. Gavin had then sued Tobias for breach of contract, effectively blacklisting him from Silicon Valley. Lydia sat down opposite him. Tobias didn't look up. "I'm not buying crypto, and I don't want to hear about your app idea," Tobias grunted. "I'm not selling crypto, Tobias. I'm selling Gavin Sterling's head on a platter." Tobias stopped typing. He looked up, his eyes widening behind thick glasses. "Lydia? Mrs. Sterling?" "Miss Cross," she corrected him. "Lydia Cross. You look different. I'm divorced. It does wonders for the complexion." She slid a folder across the table. "I know Gavin blackballed you. I know you're working freelance gigs under a pseudonym. I want to hire you." "With what money?" Tobias scoffed. "Everyone knows he cleaned you out." "I have enough for seed capital, but more importantly, I have a strategy. I'm starting a holding company. Phoenix Ventures." "Cheesy name," Tobias smirked. "Appropriate symbolism," she shot back. "Here's the pitch. Gavin's logistics network is running on your old code from 2019. It's outdated. He's too cheap to upgrade it because he's spending all his R&D budget on Sienna's lifestyle brand launches." Tobias laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "He's trying to make her a CEO. He's trying to make her the face of the company. Listen, Tobias, the system is going to crash. You know it. I know it. When the holiday rush hits in November, 3 months from now, Sterling Logistics is going to bottleneck. Drivers will be routed wrong. Packages will be lost. The stock will dip. And you want to short the stock." "No," Lydia leaned in. "I want to be the solution. I want you to build the new system. Better, faster, AI integrated. We build it now. When Gavin crashes in November, he will be desperate for a fix. We will offer him the software licensing in exchange for equity." Tobias looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was cold, hard ambition. He realized he had never really known Lydia Sterling. He had only seen the shadow she cast behind her husband. "I can build it," Tobias said, "but we need a front man. If Gavin sees your name or mine, he'll burn the building down before he signs." "Way ahead of you," Lydia said. "I've arranged a meeting with Preston Caldwell." Tobias choked on his coffee. "Caldwell? Gavin's arch-rival? The guy who runs Atlantic Freight?" "He hates Gavin." "Exactly," Lydia smiled. "The enemy of my enemy is my investor. Preston has the capital we lack. We have the tech and the inside knowledge. We give Preston a 20% cut if he acts as the face of Phoenix Ventures." "You're dangerous," Tobias said, closing his laptop. "I like it." Back in New York, Lydia began her transformation. It wasn't about vanity. It was about armor. She cut her hair into a sharp bob. She traded the shapeless cardigans for tailored power suits she found at high-end consignment shops. She met Preston Caldwell in a private room at a club in Midtown. Preston was a large man, loud and boisterous, everything Gavin pretended to be but wasn't. "So," Preston chewed on a cigar, "let me get this straight. You want me to front a company, buy up Gavin's debt when he falters, and then squeeze him out?" "I don't just want to squeeze him out, Preston," Lydia said coolly. "I want to buy the controlling interest. I want to walk into the boardroom and fire him." Preston laughed. "That's cold, Lydia. I always thought you were the nice one." "I was," Lydia said. "It didn't pay well." They shook hands. Phoenix Ventures was born. Meanwhile, in the ivory tower of Sterling Logistics, Gavin was living in a delusion. Sienna was redecorating his office in pastel pinks and hiring a vibe curator. "Babe," Sienna said, looking at her phone, Can we take the company jet to Milan for Fashion Week? My followers are expecting content." Gavin looked at the quarterly report. Profits were down 4%. Fuel costs were up. The Cobalt debt was looming. But he looked at Sienna, young, beautiful, looking at him with adoration, or what he thought was adoration. "Sure, Princess," Gavin said. "Book it." He didn't notice the warning lights blinking on the server dashboard. He didn't notice that his lead dispatch officer had quit. And he certainly didn't notice that a company called Phoenix Ventures had just quietly purchased 4% of Sterling Logistics stock on the open market. The trap was set. November arrived with a vengeance. A blizzard hit the East Coast, the worst in a decade. For a logistics company, weather is the ultimate stress test, and Sterling Logistics was failing. Gavin was in Milan, asleep in a 5-star hotel suite, when his phone began to blow up. "Mr. Sterling!" It was his VP of Operations, screaming over the phone. "The grid is down. The routing system crashed at 2 a.m. We have 5,000 trucks stranded from Maine to Florida. We don't know where the cargo is. The drivers can't log in." "Reboot the system," Gavin shouted, sitting up. Sienna groaned beside him, pulling the silk sheets over her head. "We tried. It's the old code, sir. It can't handle the volume plus the weather rerouting. It's corrupted. We are losing $100,000 an hour." Gavin flew into a panic. He flew back to New York, but the damage was done. By the time he landed, the news was everywhere. Sterling Logistics meltdown, holiday gifts stranded. Amazon cancelled their contract within 24 hours. The stock price plummeted from $80 a share to $32. Gavin sat in his office, his head in his hands. The pastel pink decor Sienna had chosen now looked mocking. "We need a fix," Gavin told his board of directors. "We need a new system now." "We can't build one fast enough," the CTO said. "But there is a solution. A new firm, Phoenix Ventures. They just launched a logistics AI platform called Nexus. It's compatible with our hardware. They claim they can integrate it in 48 hours. "Who owns Phoenix?" Gavin asked. "Preston Caldwell is the public face," the CTO said. Gavin slammed his fist on the table. "Caldwell, I'm not buying from him. He'll gouge me." "We have no choice, Gavin," the chairman of the board shouted. "The shareholders are revolting. We are bleeding. Call Caldwell." Gavin made the call. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. "Preston," Gavin gritted his teeth. "I hear you have some software." "I do," Preston's voice boomed over the speakerphone. "And it's expensive, Gavin. Very expensive." "Name your price." "I don't want cash, Gavin. I know you don't have it. I want convertible bonds. If you don't pay me back in 6 months, the debt converts to equity, stock." Gavin did the math. If he defaulted, Preston would own 15% of the company. But Gavin was arrogant. He thought he could turn it around in 6 months. "Fine," Gavin said. "Send the contract." The contract was signed. The software was installed. It worked like a dream. The trucks moved. The crisis was averted. But the Cobalt debt was still there, and Sienna was still spending. The beauty of the Nexus software wasn't that it saved Sterling Logistics from the winter blizzard. Its true genius lay in its silence. While Gavin Sterling was busy popping a $500 bottle of vintage Krug in his corner office, celebrating the fact that his trucks were finally moving again, he had absolutely no idea that he had just voluntarily installed a surveillance system into the beating heart of his empire. Every keystroke, every shipping manifest, every routing change, and, most importantly, every wire transfer was being mirrored in real time to a server farm located in a renovated loft in Dumbo, Brooklyn. This was the war room of Phoenix Ventures. It smelled of ozone, fresh coffee, and cold revenge. Tobias Frey, the man Gavin had discarded like trash 3 years prior, sat in an ergonomic chair that cost more than his previous car. His fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking the only sound in the room. On the massive wall-mounted monitors in front of him, the inner workings of Sterling Logistics were laid bare like a patient on an operating table. He's comfortable, Tobias muttered, his eyes scanning the cascading lines of code. Too comfortable. Look at his login times. He's spending less than 2 hours a day in the actual dashboard. The rest of the time, he's browsing yacht charters in the Mediterranean. Lydia Cross stood behind him, her arms crossed. She looked different now. The old and broke housewife who had been humiliated in Lukuku was gone. In her place stood a woman, forged in fire. She wore a charcoal silk blouse and tailored trousers, elegant, expensive, and understated. Her hair was sharp, her posture rigid. She wasn't just watching a company. She was watching her past life dissolve. "He thinks the crisis is over," Lydia said, her voice low. "He thinks because the trucks are moving, the money is flowing. He's forgotten about the debt service on the Cobalt loans." "Oh, he hasn't forgotten," Tobias smirked, pulling up a new window. "He's just getting creative. Lydia, come look at this." Lydia leaned in. On the screen was a complex web of transactions. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard corporate shuffling, moving capital from operational expenses to debt relief. But Lydia knew these accounts. She had set them up 20 years ago. "That's the maintenance fund," she whispered, a knot forming in her stomach. "That account is strictly for fleet repairs and driver safety equipment. Why is he draining it?" "Follow the money," Tobias said, hitting a key. The digital trail moved from the maintenance fund to a holding company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon LLC. From there, it didn't go to the bank to pay the debt. It went to a domestic account labeled Sienna Brand Management. Lydia let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It was a sound of pure disbelief. "He's stealing from the safety budget to fund her lifestyle. He's risking his drivers' lives to buy her." "What, Instagram followers?" "Worse," Tobias said. "Look at the invoices attached to Sienna Brand Management. Consulting fees for a wedding planner. A down payment on a venue in Lake Como. He's siphoning corporate funds to pay for their wedding, Lydia. He's literally dismantling the company you built to marry the woman he left you for." Lydia felt a cold rage settle over her skin. It wasn't the jealousy of an ex-wife anymore. It was the fury of a founder. "He's gutting the company. If a truck blows a tire because he skipped maintenance, people could die. We need to stop him." "We can't just stop him," Tobias warned. "If we intervene now, we expose the Trojan horse. He'll cut the connection, and we lose our leverage. We need him to make the fatal mistake, the one that crosses the line from bad management to federal crime." "He's close," Lydia said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "He's desperate. The quarterly audit is in 3 weeks. He has to plug these holes before the auditors arrive, or he goes to jail." Meanwhile, in the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the king of logistics was sweating through his Egyptian cotton sheets. Gavin Sterling woke up at 3 a.m., his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The silence of the apartment was suffocating. Beside him, Sienna was sound asleep, wearing a silk sleep mask that cost $200. She looked peaceful, completely oblivious to the fact that the man lying next to her was technically insolvent. Gavin slipped out of bed and padded into the living room. He poured himself a scotch, his hand trembling so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. They didn't look like opportunities anymore. They looked like judgment. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He flinched. It was a text from his CFO, Martin. Deutsche Bank called again. They aren't extending the grace period on the Cobalt interest payment. They want the $2.5 million by Friday, or they trigger the default clause. Gavin squeezed his eyes shut. If they triggered the default, his credit rating would collapse. The stock would tank. And if the stock tanked below $25, that vulture capital firm, Phoenix Ventures, the one run by Preston Caldwell, would own him. "Gavin?" He spun around. Sienna was standing in the doorway, wrapped in a plush robe. She looked annoyed rather than concerned. "Why are you awake?" she asked, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "You're going to wake the dogs." Work, babe. Just work. We'll keep it down, she said, walking into the kitchen to grab a water. Oh, by the way, the florist for the reception needs another deposit. Apparently $20,000 wasn't enough to secure the white hydrangeas. They need another 10 by tomorrow. Gavin stared at her. $10,000? For flowers? Sienna turned, her eyes narrowing. Are we doing this again? You promised me the fairy tale, Gavin. You said, Sienna, you deserve the world. Is the world suddenly too expensive for you? Because my ex, the hedge fund guy, he never complained about the price of hydrangeas. The comparison hit him like a physical slap. It was the one thing Gavin couldn't handle, being thought of as lesser than the other men in her orbit. He was the CEO. He was the provider. He was the alpha. I'll handle it, Gavin snapped, downing the scotch in one burn. Don't worry about the flowers. Go back to bed. Sienna smiled, a cold, satisfied expression. Good. Don't stay up too late. You look haggard. It's bad for the brand. She left him alone in the dark. Gavin sat down at his laptop. He logged into the secure banking portal of Sterling Logistics. His hands were shaking, but his resolve was hardening. He had to pay the bank $2.5 million. He had to pay the florist. He had to pay the lease on the jet. He looked at the accounts. The maintenance fund was dry. The R&D budget was gone. The only account with significant liquidity left was the Employee Pension Trust. It was sacred ground. Touching it was a felony. It was the retirement savings of 3,000 truck drivers, warehouse workers, and dispatchers, people who had worked for him for decades, people Lydia knew by name. It's just a loan, Gavin whispered to himself, the lies tumbling out to soothe his conscience. I'll pay it back next month when the holiday revenue hits. No one will ever know. I'm the CEO. I can authorize this. He navigated to the transfer screen. Source, Sterling Logistics Employee Pension Fund. Destination, Sterling General Operating Account. Amount, $3 million. His finger hovered over the execute button. He hesitated. For a split second, he saw Lydia's face in his mind, the look of disappointment she used to give him when he cut corners. Screw her, he hissed. She's old. I'm winning. He pressed enter. A red alert flashed across the main screen in the Phoenix Ventures war room. The sound was a jarring, digital siren that made Tobias jump. Whoa! Tobias yelled. Lydia! He did it! He actually did it! Lydia rushed over, spilling her tea. What happened? He just moved $3 million from the pension fund, Tobias said, his voice filled with awe and horror. He authorized it with his personal admin key. We have the digital fingerprint. We have the IP address from his penthouse. Lydia stared at the screen. She felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of icy clarity. This was it. This was the smoking gun. He just stole $3 million from the workers, Lydia said quietly. He didn't just cross the line, Tobias. He just signed his own death warrant. We have him on wire fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty, Tobias listed off, typing furiously to capture the logs. If we send this to the SEC, they'll freeze his assets within the hour. No, Lydia said sharply. Not yet. Tobias stopped typing. What? Lydia, he's robbing the company blind. Every minute we wait, that money disappears. If we trigger the investigation now, the stock halts, Lydia explained, her mind racing 3 steps ahead. The government steps in, the company goes into receivership, and the lawyers pick the carcass clean for years. The workers will lose everything anyway. So what do? We need to own the company before the scandal breaks, Lydia said. We need the stock to crash, but we need it to crash on our terms, so we can trigger the bond conversion. We need to be the ones catching the falling knife. She walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline across the river. He's going to use that money to pay off the bank and the wedding planner, Lydia strategized. He's going to feel safe again. He's going to think he got away with it. We're going to let him enjoy that feeling for exactly 5 days. What happens in 5 days? Tobias asked. Lydia turned back, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying intensity. "The annual Sterling Gala," she said. "He invited the entire industry, the press, the board, the investors. It's his vanity project. He wants to be celebrated as the King of New York. And we're going to give him a celebration he'll never forget," Lydia vowed. "We aren't going to leak this to the press today. We're going to hand-deliver the evidence to the board of directors right in the middle of his toast." Tobias whistled low. "That's not just business, Lydia. That's theatrical." "He wanted drama," Lydia said, picking up her phone to call Preston Caldwell. "He wanted a younger, more exciting life. I'm just going to give him the grand finale." She dialed the number. "Preston," she said when he answered, "get your tuxedo ready. We're going to a party." The next few days were a blur of calculated silence. Gavin, buoyed by the influx of stolen cash, was manic. He paid the bank. He paid the florist. He even bought Sienna a diamond bracelet as an apology for the budget talk. He walked through the hallways of Sterling Logistics like a god. He high-fived the new interns. He ignored the grim faces of the old-timers who sensed something was wrong with the accounts, but were too afraid to speak up. He had no idea that beneath the floorboards of his reality, the termites were chewing through the foundation. Lydia, meanwhile, was finalizing the alliance. She met with Arthur Penhaligon, her father's old lawyer, in a diner in Queens. "You have the documents?" Arthur asked, adjusting his glasses. "Digital proof," Lydia said, handing him a secure drive, and Tobias located the physical backup archives. "They are in the old warehouse in Queens. Gavin was too lazy to move them or shred them. If this goes wrong, Lydia," Arthur warned, "you could be implicated. You were his wife when the Cobalt Initiative started. If he goes down, he will try to drag you with him." "Let him try," Lydia said, sipping her coffee. "I have the one thing Gavin never had." "What's that?" "The truth," Lydia said, "and a very good lawyer." Arthur smiled. "The best. Everything was in place. The trap was primed. The bait, Gavin's own arrogance, was set." As the sun set on the eve of the gala, Lydia stood in her apartment, looking at the dress she had bought for the occasion. It was midnight blue velvet. It was bold. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she is coming to claim what is hers. She touched the fabric, thinking of the 20 years she had spent in the background, smoothing Gavin's ruffled feathers, fixing his mistakes, letting him take the credit. "No more," she whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow night, the world would see who the real Sterling was. Tomorrow night, the old and broke ex-wife was coming to collect, and the price of admission was going to be Gavin's entire life. The Sterling Logistics Annual Gala was the crown jewel of the New York corporate social calendar. Held in the Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it was a spectacle of excess. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. A string quartet played contemporary pop songs. The lighting was tailored to make everyone look 10 years younger and $1 billion richer. Gavin stood at the center of it all, a glass of scotch in his hand, holding court. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo. Sienna was on his arm, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's houses. A dazzling smile plastered on her face as she live-streamed the event to her followers. "And here we are with the genius behind it all," Sienna cooed into her phone, leaning into Gavin. "My hubby," Gavin beamed. He felt invincible. The stock had stabilized. Barely, thanks to the creative accounting. The Nexus system was running smoothly. He had survived the winter. "Gavin!" a voice boomed. It was Richard Thorne, his lawyer, looking unusually pale. "Not now, Richard," Gavin laughed, slapping him on the back. "Drink, celebrate. We're up 2% this quarter." "Gavin, we need to talk," Richard hissed, grabbing Gavin's elbow with a grip that was painful. "Privately, now." Gavin pulled his arm away, annoyed. "Don't be such a killjoy. It can wait until Monday." "It can't," Richard whispered. "Have you checked your phone? Or the news?" "I'm at a party, Richard. I don't check the news. Check it. Gavin frowned. He pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. There were 40 missed calls, 30 texts, and a notification from the Wall Street Journal that was trending globally, breaking Sterling Logistics under investigation for pension fraud, CEO linked to offshore embezzlement. Gavin felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to tilt. The chatter of the party, once a comforting hum, now sounded like the buzzing of 1,000,000 angry wasps. "What is this?" Gavin whispered. "Who leaked this?" "The documents were sent anonymously to the SEC and the Journal an hour ago," Richard said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They have everything, Gavin. The shell companies, the Sienna expenses, the pension transfers. It's all there. Receipts, emails, wire transfers." Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. Phones were lighting up in hands. Whispers rippled through the crowd. People glanced at Gavin, then looked away, then whispered again. The circle around him began to widen as people physically distanced themselves from the fallout. "My stock," Gavin gasped. "What's the stock doing?" "It's in free fall in after-hours trading," Richard said grimly. "It dropped to $18 a share 10 minutes ago." 18, Gavin choked. "But the trigger, the convertible bonds, if it stays below $25 for more than an hour," Richard said, looking like he wanted to vomit. "Phoenix Ventures has the right to convert their debt into equity immediately. They will own 51% of the company." "Get Preston Caldwell on the phone," Gavin screamed, no longer caring about the scene he was making. "Get him on the phone, now! I'll sue him! I'll kill him!" Sienna looked at Gavin, then at her phone where comments were flooding in. #scammer, #gold digger, #prison wife. She stopped recording. She took a step back. "Gavin, is this true?" she asked, her voice shrill. "Shut up!" Gavin snapped at her. "Richard, call Caldwell." Suddenly, the massive double doors of the hall opened. The room went silent. Walking in wasn't the police. It wasn't the SEC. It was Preston Caldwell. He was wearing a tuxedo, looking smug. But he wasn't alone. He was flanking a woman. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves, a sharp contrast to the chaotic, gaudy fashion of the other guests. Her hair was a chic auburn bob. She walked with a grace and power that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. Gavin squinted. He blinked. He couldn't process what he was seeing. It was Lydia. But it wasn't the Lydia he had discarded. It wasn't the old and broke housewife. This was a woman who looked like she owned the museum, the city, and the very air Gavin was struggling to breathe. She walked straight toward him, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Preston Caldwell stayed a step behind her, acting like a bodyguard. Tobias Frey, cleaned up in a suit, walked on her other side. "Lydia," Gavin whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? This is a private event. Security." "Security works for the company, Gavin," Lydia said. Her voice was calm, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the hall, and as of 12 minutes ago, I own the company. A gasp went through the crowd. "You?" Gavin laughed, a manic, hysterical sound. "You're broke. You're nobody. You're collecting alimony." "Actually," Lydia smiled, and it was the terrifying smile of a predator playing with its food. "I'm the majority shareholder of Phoenix Ventures. I'm the one who bought your debt. I'm the one who saved your logistics grid. And I'm the one who just exercised the option to take control." Gavin staggered back, hitting the champagne table. Glasses shattered. "No," he stammered. "Preston, you said—" "I said I was the face," Preston shrugged, lighting a cigar. "Lydia is the brains. And the bank." Lydia stepped closer, into Gavin's personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and victory. "You told me I was expired, Gavin. You told me I couldn't afford you." She reached out and plucked the half-empty glass of scotch from his trembling hand. She set it down on a passing waiter's tray. "It turns out," Lydia whispered, loud enough for Sienna and the board members to hear, "you were right. I can't afford you. You're a liability. You're bad for business. You're obsolete." Lydia, please. Gavin's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, looking for an ally. There were none. Even Sienna had vanished into the crowd. We can talk about this. We were married for 20 years. Don't do this here. I'm not doing anything, Gavin, Lydia said. I'm just conducting a performance review. She turned to the crowd, addressing the board of directors who were huddled together, looking terrified. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Lydia announced, I am calling an emergency meeting. Right now, first order of business, the immediate termination of Gavin Sterling as CEO for gross negligence and fraud. Seconded, Preston Caldwell shouted. All in favour? Lydia asked. Hands went up around the room. Not just the board, but investors, former friends, people Gavin had bullied for years. Lydia turned back to her ex-husband. You're fired, Gavin. Security will escort you out. Don't take the company car. It's company property. Gavin stood there, stripped of his title, his dignity, and his future. He looked at Lydia, really looked at her, for the first time in years. He saw the intelligence he had ignored, the strength he had underestimated. Lydia, he choked out. Goodbye, Gavin, she said, turning her back on him. 2 security guards, men Gavin had hired, stepped forward. This way, sir. As Gavin was led out of the gala, the flashbulbs exploded. He wasn't the king anymore. He was the entertainment. Lydia didn't watch him go. She turned to Tobias. Get the PR team on the line, she said, shifting instantly into CEO mode. We need to stabilize the stock and reassure the unions. The pension money goes back tomorrow morning. On it, boss, Tobias said. Lydia took a sip of champagne. It tasted like justice. But the story wasn't quite over. Gavin Sterling wasn't the type to go quietly into the night. He had one card left to play, a card so desperate and dangerous it could burn them all down. The morning after the gala, the sun rose over Manhattan with a brilliance that felt almost mocking to Gavin Sterling. He was sitting on the edge of a bed in a mid-tier hotel near LaGuardia Airport, the only place that would take his credit card, which hadn't yet been frozen by the DOJ. His phone was dead. He hadn't charged it. He didn't want to. He knew what was waiting for him. Voicemails from the SEC, emails from angry investors, and silence from Sienna. Sienna had posted a story on Instagram at 3 a.m. It was a picture of her luggage with the caption, Toxic people are like anchors. Cutting the rope today. #new beginnings, #single life. Gavin threw the phone against the wall. It shattered, much like his ego. But Gavin Sterling was a man who had built a logistics empire on bullying and bluffing. He wasn't going to let a housewife and a failed coder take it all without a fight. He remembered something. A fail-safe. In the chaos of the takeover, Lydia and Tobias had locked him out of the servers. They had seized the accounts. But they had forgotten the physical archives. Deep in the basement of the old Sterling headquarters in Queens, the building they had moved out of 2 years ago but still owned, were the paper records of the Cobalt Initiative. Gavin knew there were documents there with Lydia's signature on them. Forged, yes. But could he prove that? If he could leak those papers, he could drag Lydia down with him. If he was going to burn, she would burn too. He washed his face, put on his rumpled tuxedo shirt, and hailed a cab. He didn't have cash. He'd deal with that when he got there. The old Queen's warehouse was dark and smelled of dust and diesel. It was a stark contrast to the glass tower in Manhattan, but this was where it had all started. Gavin used a crowbar he found in the loading dock to pry open the side door. He moved through the shadows, his heart pounding. He made his way to the records room. He fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life with a sickly hum. Looking for these, Gavin? Gavin spun around, dropping the crowbar. It clattered loudly on the concrete floor. Sitting on a stack of pallets in the center of the room was Lydia. She was wearing a trench coat, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Standing behind her were 2 men, Tobias Frey, holding a tablet, and a tall, grim-faced man Gavin didn't recognize. "Lydia," Gavin breathed. his eyes darting around the room. You knew I'd come here." "I know how you think, Gavin," Lydia said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "You're predictable. When you're cornered, you don't reflect. You attack. You came for the 2018 tax returns, the ones where you forged my signature to hide the Cobalt losses." Gavin sneered, stepping forward. "They have your name on them, Lyd. You're the co-signer. You're complicit. If I go to prison for fraud, you're coming with me. We're partners, remember? Till death do us part." He lunged for a file cabinet. "Don't," the grim-faced man said, stepping forward. He flashed a badge. "FBI. Step away from the evidence, Mr. Sterling." Gavin froze. He looked at the badge, then at Lydia. "You called the feds?" Gavin whispered, betrayed. "On your own husband?" "Ex-husband," Lydia corrected. "And I didn't just call them, Gavin. I've been working with them for 3 months." Gavin's knees gave out. He slumped against a wooden crate. "Arthur Penhaligon advised me to file for innocent spouse relief the moment we separated," Lydia explained, standing up and walking toward him. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the concrete. "We handed over the forensic accounting of your forgery weeks ago. Tobias traced the digital signatures. The FBI has been building a case against you for the pension embezzlement. They just needed you to lead them to the physical paper trail to seal the deal." "You set me up," Gavin croaked. "No," Lydia said, crouching down so she was eye level with him. "I just turned on the lights. You're the one who made the mess." Gavin looked at her. He saw the woman he had married 20 years ago. The woman who had packed his lunch, raised his daughter, and balanced his books. He realized with a crushing weight that she had always been the strong one. He was just the noise. "Lydia," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I'm 52. I can't go to prison. I'll die in there. I'll give you everything. I'll sign over the rest of the shares. Just tell them it was a mistake." Lydia looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You have nothing left to give me, Gavin. I already took it back." She stood up and nodded to the agent. "He's all yours." "Lydia!" Gavin screamed as the agent cuffed him. "Lydia, don't leave me here. I made you. You are nothing without me. You're just an old woman." Lydia paused at the door. She turned back, her silhouette framed by the daylight pouring in from the exit. "I may be old, Gavin," she said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "But I'm rich, and unlike you, I'm free." She walked out into the fresh air, leaving the door open for the police to haul him away. 6 months later, the boardroom of Sterling Cross Logistics was buzzing. The rebrand had been a massive success. The stock was trading at an all-time high of $115 a share. Lydia sat at the head of the table. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed authority. To her right sat Tobias Frey, the new chief technology officer. To her left was Arthur Penhaligon, acting as legal counsel. "The union negotiations are complete," the HR director reported. "The drivers are happy with the restored pension plan. Efficiency is up 12% thanks to the Nexus integration." "Excellent," Lydia said. "And the Cobalt debt?" "Paid off in full," Tobias grinned. "We're in the black, boss." Lydia nodded. She looked out the window at the skyline. Somewhere in that city, in a federal holding facility, Gavin was awaiting trial. He was facing 15 years. Sienna had already sold her tell-all interview to Vanity Fair and moved to Dubai with a soccer player. Lydia turned back to her team. She didn't feel bitter. She didn't feel angry. She felt capable. "One more thing," Lydia said. "I'm establishing a new scholarship fund, the Second Act Initiative. It grants business capital and education to women over 40 who are restarting their careers after divorce." The board applauded. Lydia smiled. She wasn't just the ex-wife. She wasn't just the victim. She was the CEO, and she was just getting started. As the meeting adjourned, Lydia walked back to her office. She picked up a framed photo on her desk. It was a picture of her and her daughter, laughing on a boat. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a private number. I saw the Forbes article. The comeback queen. You look good, Lydia. John. Lydia looked at the message. For a second, she remembered the man he used to be. Then she remembered the man who called her broken. She didn't reply. She blocked the number. She picked up her bag, a Birkin she had bought with her own dividend check, and walked out of the office. The elevator arrived. She stepped in, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors close on the past. Going down? No. Lydia Cross was only going up, and that is how Lydia turned her expiration date into a launch pad. Gavin learned the hard way that when you call a woman old and broke, you better make sure she isn't the one holding the keys to your kingdom. It's a powerful reminder. Dignity has no age limit, and the best revenge isn't just success. It's erasing the people who doubted you from your payroll. If this story fired you up, if you cheered for Lydia's comeback, then hit that like button right now. It helps us bring more of these karmic justice stories to life. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because next week we have a story about a landlord who tried to evict a single mum, only to find out she was his new boss. You don't want to miss it. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their second act can be their best act. Thanks for watching, and stay strong.